The year is 2012, October. The air outside smells like cold dirt and diesel. Inside the new John Deere dealership, it smells like fresh paint and ambition. Glass walls, polished concrete floors. A row of massive green combines sit like sleeping dinosaurs under fluorescent lights. Daniel Miller, the general manager, sits in his office. He's Frank Miller's son. He has his father's kind eyes, but not his father's certainty. The world had become too complex for certainty. He's reviewing the County Agricultural Extension Report, a thick stack of data. Yields, input costs, profit margins per acre. He flips a page, then another. He stops. His finger rests on a single line entry. Vance Farms. He reads the numbers again. Corn yields, 235 bushels per acre. County average, 190. Soybean yields, 78 bushels per acre. County average, 55. But that wasn't the number that made him pause. It was the next column. Input cost per acre, $387. The next lowest in the county was $612. His own top clients were closer to $700. It made no sense. This was impossible efficiency. He scanned down the page. A small note from the extension agent. Equipment profile. All assets owned outright. No-till methods since 1998. Custom fabricated planter attachments. And then the last line. No equipment financing on record since 1978. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair. Vance. Elara Vance. He knew the name. It was a ghost in this dealership. A story his father rarely told. He stood up and walked to a steel filing cabinet in the corner. The old records. The paper records. From his father's time. The drawer screeched open. He ran his finger along the tabs. S. T. U. V. Vance. Elara. The folder was thin. He pulled it out. Inside, a single loan application from March 1978 for a John Deere 4440 tractor. Price, $34,500. The application was filled out in neat, confident handwriting. A complete 5-year crop plan attached. Soil analysis from the university. Everything was perfect. At the bottom, in the space for approval, was a single word. Denied. Beneath it, in his father's familiar script, was a short note. He had to lean in to read it. The ink was faded. It read, "Applicant is single female, 28 years old. Recently inherited family farm. Good plan, but this is too much machine for one person. High risk of default. I cannot, in good conscience, burden this young woman with such a debt. Recommended 2040 model instead." She refused. Daniel Miller closed the folder. He stood there in the quiet of his modern office, holding a piece of paper that represented a 34-year-old mistake. A mistake made from kindness. A mistake made from certainty. He looked out the glass wall at the biggest, most powerful tractor on his showroom floor. A brand new 9R590, $500,000 of steel and processing power. Last week, a truck had delivered one just like it to Vance Farms. The invoice was paid in full, cash. This is a story about the 34 years that happened between that folder and that delivery. It's a story about a quiet fight, not against a villain, but against a helping hand. This channel tells the stories that get left in the filing cabinet, the stories of people who were told they couldn't, and then did. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel, because what happened on Ilara Vance's farm changed more than just her life. It changed the land itself. Let's go back. March 1978. The snow is melting. The ground is soft and smells of promise. Ilara Vance is 28 years old. She stands in the yard of her family's farm. The farmhouse needs a coat of paint. The barn roof is patched in 3 different shades of tin. This is her home. 160 acres of dark, rich Iowa soil. Her father's soul was in this land. Now his body was in the church cemetery just over the hill. He'd held on for a year after the diagnosis. Long enough to see her through one more harvest. Long enough to teach her everything he knew again. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, he'd looked at her. His hands, once so strong, were thin and frail. He said, "Ilara, they'll come for the land. The bankers, the neighbors, the tax man, they'll tell you you can't do it alone. They'll tell you to sell." She had just nodded, unable to speak. He'd reached across and patted her hand. "Don't you listen. They took everything from my father in the Dust Bowl, everything except the dirt. He came here with a pocket full of seeds and a handful of dirt. The dirt is enough," he'd whispered. "Remember that. The dirt is enough." He was gone 2 months later, and the dirt was all she had left. That and $12,000 in savings. And an old Alice Chalmers 190XT that leaked hydraulic fluid like a sieve. The engine was tired. The transmission slipped. It wouldn't survive another planting season. She knew it. Her father had known it. To keep the farm, she needed a new tractor. Not just any tractor. She'd done the math 100 times. On the back of envelopes, in a ledger book, at the kitchen table late at night with a cup of coffee. 160 acres, corn and soybeans. She needed horsepower. She needed reliability. She needed a John Deere 4440. It was the best tractor on the market. 130 horsepower, sound guard body, quad-range transmission. It was a machine built to last. It was also $34,500. A fortune. But the math worked. With that tractor, she could get the crop in faster. She could work the fields with more precision. The fuel efficiency alone would save her thousands. The yields would go up. She projected she could pay the loan off in 5 years, maybe 4. It was a risk, but staying small was a bigger risk. Farming is a business of scale. You either get bigger or you get out. Her father taught her that too. So she put on her good coat, the one she wore to church. She gathered her ledger book and her soil maps. She drove her father's old Ford pickup into town, to the John Deere dealership. The bell on the door jingled. The place smelled of new tires, fresh coffee, and old grease. Frank Miller was behind the counter. He was a pillar of the community, coached her brother's Little League team, sat on the town council, always had a kind word for everyone. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, genuine smile. "Ilara, good to see you. I was so sorry to hear about your father. He was a good man." "Thank you, Frank. What can I do for you today?" She took a deep breath. "I'd like to buy a tractor." His smile widened. "Well, you came to the right place. What are you thinking?" She slid the ledger book onto the counter. A4440. Frank's smile didn't vanish, but it changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, concern. A4440, he repeated slowly. He tapped a pen on the counter. "That's a lot of tractor, Ilara. A real workhorse." "I know. That's why I need it." She opened the ledger. She walked him through her plan. Acreage, crop rotation, projected yields, fuel costs, loan amortization schedule. She had done the work. She knew her numbers cold. He listened patiently. He nodded in all the right places. He looked at her figures. He looked at her soil maps. When she was finished, there was a long silence. He looked up from the book. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw it. The look she would come to know so well. Pity. This is a fine plan, Ilara. Truly, one of the best I've seen. Your father taught you well. She felt a flicker of hope. He continued, but a tractor this size, it's a two-person job. The maintenance, the hours, running a machine like that from dawn till dusk, it's a heavy burden. She just stared at him. Her hope died. He leaned forward, his voice soft, confidential. Where's your husband? She didn't have one. Or your brother? I know he's in Des Moines, but maybe he's thinking of coming back? He's not coming back. It's just me. Frank sighed, a deep, paternal sigh. He closed the ledger book and pushed it gently back towards her. Ilara, I've known you since you were a little girl. I'm not going to be the man who sells you a machine that breaks you. I can't in good conscience sign off on this loan for you alone. It's too much risk. For you. He wasn't talking about the bank's risk. He was talking about hers. He thought he was protecting her. That was the part that stung. It wasn't malice. It wasn't contempt. It was kindness. A terrible, suffocating kindness. Now, he said, brightening, we just got in a lovely little 2040, 52 horsepower, perfect for a place your size. We could get you in that for a fraction of the price, no trouble at all. A 2040 was a utility tractor. It was for mowing ditches and moving hay bales. It couldn't plow 160 acres. It was an insult wrapped in concern. She stood up. Her hands were trembling. She put them in her coat pockets. No, thank you, Frank. She turned and walked out of the dealership. The bell jingled behind her. She didn't look back. She drove home in a haze. She didn't cry. She wasn't angry. She felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. A resolve. Proving someone wrong who hates you is a fight. Proving someone wrong who pities you is a war. It is the loneliest war there is. She got home and sat at the kitchen table. The ledger book lay open, a monument to a failed plan. She looked at the photograph of her father on the wall. He was standing in a field of tall corn, smiling. She heard his voice in her head. The dirt is enough. She closed the ledger. She took out a new sheet of paper and started a different kind of math. She had $12,000. It wasn't enough for a new 4440. It wasn't enough for a decent used one, but it might be enough for a broken one. The next Saturday, she went to a farm auction 20 miles away. It was a muddy field full of old men in seed corn hats. They watched her as she walked the rows of equipment. She ignored them. She was looking for one thing: power. And she found it. Sitting at the back of the lot, an International Harvester 1066 from 1975. It was a monster, bigger than the 4440, 140 horsepower at the PTO. It was caked in mud and grease. The paint was faded to a dull orange. One of the rear tires was flat. A cardboard sign was wired to the steering wheel. Cracked block, runs rough, as is. That's why it was in the back. Nobody wanted a project that big. The auctioneer started the bidding at $5,000. Silence. $4,000. Silence. Ilara raised her hand. 1,000. A few of the old men chuckled. The auctioneer looked at her, annoyed. $1,000. I have 1,000. Do I hear two? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold to the young lady for $1,000. She paid in cash and spent another $300 to have it hauled to her farm. It sat in her yard like a dead giant. Her neighbors drove by slowly. They'd stop at the end of her lane, look at the dead tractor, shake their heads, go home and call their friends. That Vance girl, she's lost her mind. Frank Miller heard about it at the coffee shop. He felt a pang of sadness. He knew he'd been right. She was in over her head. He'd done the right thing. 2 days later, a pickup truck pulled into Ilara's yard. It was Silas Croft, a farmer from the next township over. He was in his 70s. He'd farmed alongside her grandfather. He got out of his truck and walked over to the 1066. He didn't say hello. He just walked around it, kicked the good tire, looked at the engine. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Cracked block," he said. Ilara stood on the porch, watching him. "I know." Silas looked at her. "Your father helped me raise my barn back in '58. A storm had taken the roof clean off. He never asked for a thing in return." He reached into his truck and pulled out a stack of books. They were thick, grease-stained manuals. An engine overhaul guide for the DT414. A hydraulics schematic. A parts catalog. He set them on the edge of the porch. He didn't hand them to her. He just set them down. "Don't know if you'll have any use for these." He got back in his truck and drove away. That night, Ilara opened the first manual. The work began. She had 6 weeks until she needed to plant. She drained the oil and coolant. She bought a chain hoist and pulled the engine. It took her 3 days. Her hands were cut and bleeding. Her left arm, weaker since a childhood break that never healed right, ached constantly. This was the arm Frank Miller had seen. The arm that confirmed his judgment. She found the crack in the block, just like the sign said, a hairline fracture near the number 3 cylinder. She couldn't afford a new block, so she learned to weld cast iron. She read the books. She called a retired machinist her father had known. He talked her through it on the phone. Preheat the block, use high nickel rods. Peen the weld while it cools. Don't rush it. It took her a week, a slow, painstaking process. She rebuilt the cylinder head, lapped the valves, replaced the piston rings. She ordered the parts by mail, paid with her dwindling savings. The men at the Napa store in town smirked when she came in, ordering parts for a 1066. "Sure, little lady." She ignored them. She just read the part numbers from her list, paid in cash, and left. Have you ever been told you can't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend. By someone who genuinely believed they were saving you from yourself. What did you do? Did you argue? Did you walk away? Or did you go to work? Let me know in the comments below. Because Ilara Vance didn't say a word. She just worked. By mid-April, the engine was back in the tractor. She had spent another $4,000 on parts. She had $6,000 left. The day she tried to start it, the entire neighborhood was watching. They didn't stand in her yard. They just happened to be fixing fences along her property line, or driving by real slow on the road. She climbed into the cab, turned the key. The engine turned over, once, twice. A puff of black smoke shot out of the exhaust pipe. Then it caught. A loud, clattering roar filled the air. It wasn't a smooth sound. It was angry. It was alive. The men fixing fences stopped working. They just stared. Ilara put the tractor in gear and drove it into the field. She planted all 160 acres in 10 days. That summer, the rains came at the right time. The sun shone when it needed to. Her corn grew tall and green. Her soybeans were thick and full. In the fall, she hired a custom harvester. Her yields were 20% above the county average. She paid her property taxes. She paid her operating loan at the bank. She had $11,000 left over. She bought a better welder and a used planter. Cash. The talk in the coffee shop changed. Lucky year, some said. Beginner's luck. But others weren't so sure. Frank Miller drove past her farm. He saw the fields, clean and well-tended. He saw the 1066, muddy but proud, parked by the barn. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was confusion. The story of the next 30 years is a story of numbers. It's a story of quiet, relentless accumulation. Let me tell you about those years. By 1982, she had strung together 4 good harvests. The 1066 was still running. She knew every bolt, every gasket on that machine. She could diagnose a problem by the sound it made. An 80-acre parcel next to hers came up for sale. The farmer was retiring. He wanted $60,000. She went to the bank. They offered her a loan with 20% down. She said no. She went to the farmer, offered him $55,000, cash. He took it. Now she was farming 240 acres with one ugly, rebuilt tractor. In 1985, Frank Miller's John Deere dealership had its best year ever. He sold 20 new 444s. Farmers were borrowing heavily, taking advantage of new lines of credit, expanding fast. Ilara bought another 40 acres from an estate sale, cash. She was farming 280 acres. In 1988, the farm crisis hit. Commodity prices collapsed. Interest rates soared. The farmers who had borrowed heavily were wiped out. Foreclosure auctions became a weekly event. John Deere dealerships were filled with repossessed equipment. Frank Miller's business almost went under. He had to lay off half his staff. He saw his friends and neighbors lose their family farms. Farms they had worked for generations. Ilara Vance had no debt. She had her land. She had her tractor. She had money in the bank. She survived. She watched her neighbors lose everything, and she remembered her father's words, "The dirt is enough." In 1990, a 320-acre farm on her southern border went to auction. The bank had taken it. Ilara went to the auction. She stood at the back. She listened as the bidding stalled. Then she bought the entire farm for a third of what it was worth 3 years earlier. Cash. She was now farming 600 acres. She finally had too much land for one tractor. She went to a Case IH dealership in the next county. She never set foot in Frank Miller's dealership again. She bought a brand new Case IH Magnum 7140, one of the most powerful 2-wheel drive tractors you could buy. She paid for it with a check. No financing. Cash. The Case dealer called his friends. The story got back to Frank. He was sitting in his office, looking at a pile of unpaid bills. And he felt that feeling again, stronger this time. It was starting to feel like regret. The 90s were good to Ilara. She was known for 2 things, her immaculate fields and her quietness. She never went to the coffee shop. She never gossiped. She just worked. She started experimenting with no-till farming, planting directly into the stubble of the previous year's crop. It was a new idea. Most farmers thought it was crazy. You have to plow the land. You have to turn the soil. That's how it's always been done. But Ilara saw the waste, the fuel burned in tillage, the soil erosion, the moisture lost to the wind. So she built her own planter. She took a new John Deere planter frame, bought from a different dealer, of course, and she modified it in her workshop. She designed and fabricated her own row cleaners, her own coulters. She spent a winter with her welder and her lathe, creating a machine that did exactly what she wanted. Her neighbors thought she was nuts, until they saw her yields. They stayed the same, but her costs plummeted. She was making fewer passes across the field, using less diesel, less labor. The soil structure on her farm began to change. It held water better. The earthworms came back. The land was healing. The dirt was becoming more than enough. By 2005, Vance Farms was 1,200 acres, all of it paid for, all of it contiguous. A single massive block of the richest soil in Iowa. Frank Miller retired that year. He handed the dealership over to his son, Daniel. At his retirement party, someone asked him what his biggest regret was. He gave a politician's answer, said he wished he could have helped more people. But later that night, he sat on his porch, and he knew. His biggest regret was a thin file folder, for a loan he refused to give, to a woman he tried to protect. Which brings us to 2013, a year after Daniel Miller found that file. Frank is 78 years old. His world has gotten smaller. His wife passed away. His friends are mostly gone. He spends his days reading and watching the world change. He hears the stories about Ilara Vance. Everyone does. She's not just a farmer anymore. She's a force of nature. Daniel comes to visit him one Sunday. His son looks tired, worried. "Dad, I don't know how she does it." "Who, son?" "Ilara Vance. Her efficiency is off the charts. She's running a 1,500-acre operation with the overhead of a 500-acre farm. The other big operators are drowning in debt to keep up. She's buying land from them." Frank just nodded. He knew. The next morning, Frank got in his car. He didn't know where he was going, but his hands steered the car out of town, onto the county roads, towards her farm. He pulled into her long gravel lane. It was lined with mature oak trees she had planted 20 years ago. The farmhouse had new siding and a new roof. The barn was painted a crisp, clean white. A massive new machine shed stood behind it. The door was open. He saw her inside. She was older now, of course. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was wearing grease-stained coveralls. She was standing on a stool, working on the header of a giant green combine, a wrench in her hand. Her left arm, the one he remembered as being weaker, moved with practiced efficiency. She wasn't weak. She was just left-handed. He'd mistaken it for an infirmity. A small, devastating detail he'd gotten wrong. He got out of the car. His knees ached. He felt very old. He walked to the entrance of the shed. She heard his footsteps on the gravel. She turned and looked down at him. She didn't seem surprised. She just watched him. Her eyes were the same, clear, steady, unreadable. "Frank Miller," she said. It wasn't a question. He cleared his throat. "Ilara." He had practiced a speech in the car, an explanation, an apology. It all evaporated in the silence of that machine shed. All he had left was the truth. "I came to say I was wrong." He said it to the concrete floor. He couldn't look at her. "All those years ago, about the tractor, about you. I was wrong." She didn't say anything. She just climbed down from the stool. She picked up a rag and wiped her hands, slowly, deliberately. Then she looked at him, and she delivered the quiet, devastating truth, the line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You weren't just wrong, Frank. You were certain." She paused. "And there's nothing harder to fight in this world, nothing lonelier, than a man who is certain he's being kind." He finally looked up at her. He saw no anger in her eyes, no triumph, just a deep, quiet weariness. "The loan was never the point," she said. "The tractor was never the point. The point was that you looked at me, and you didn't see a farmer. You saw a woman, and you thought that was a liability." He had no answer. There was no answer. She turned and went back to her work. The conversation was over. It had been over for 35 years. Frank Miller turned and walked back to his car, a smaller man than the one who had arrived. But that's not the end of the story, because what Ilara Vance built was bigger than a farm. It was a legacy. She never married, she never had children, but her farm had heirs, hundreds of them. In 2010, she established the Vance Independent Agriculture Grant. It wasn't a scholarship to a university. It was startup capital for young farmers who wanted to start on their own. But there was a condition. You couldn't apply with a bank. You had to present your business plan to a board of 3 people: Ilara, Silas Croft, the old farmer who gave her the manuals, and a young woman who had used Ilara's no-till methods to save her own family farm. They didn't look at credit scores. They looked at the plan. They looked at the person. They looked for the grit in their eyes. The first grant was for $50,000. It went to a young woman from southern Iowa. She wanted to start a small organic vegetable farm. The banks had laughed at her. Ilara didn't laugh. She gave her the money and her cell phone number. Today, that farm supplies produce to restaurants all over the state. The Vance Grant has given out over $2 million. It has launched 47 new farms. 30 of them are run by women. Ilara's methods, once considered radical, are now taught at Iowa State University. The custom planter she designed in her workshop has been copied and refined. It's now a standard for no-till operations. She didn't patent it. She gave the plans away for free. The real legacy wasn't the money. It was the permission to try, the permission to be seen. Ilara Vance passed away in 2019. She was 70 years old. She left the farm, all 1,800 acres of it, to a trust. The Vance Trust is now a working farm and an educational center, managed by 3 of her first grant recipients. They teach sustainable farming. They teach financial independence. They teach young farmers how to rebuild an engine, how to weld, how to read the land. They teach them that the dirt is enough. Inside the main workshop, on a clean, well-lit wall, hangs a single object. It's a steering wheel, old and worn. The plastic is cracked. The center cap is missing. It's from a 1975 International Harvester 1066. It's mounted like a piece of art. Underneath it is a small brass plaque. It just says, "Permission is not required." That is the story of Ilara Vance. A story of quiet defiance. A story of a woman who was told no and built an empire out of spite and soil. But it's also a universal story. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is walking into an office, a bank, a boardroom, a dealership. They have a plan. They have the knowledge. They have the will. And a person on the other side of the desk is going to look at them and see something else. Their age, their gender, their skin color, their background. And out of a sense of certainty, out of a desire to be kind, to protect them, they are going to say no. This story is for the person who walks out of that room. The fight is not with the person who said no. The fight is with the silence on the drive home. The fight is with the doubt that creeps in. The fight is long. It is quiet. It is lonely. But it is winnable. If this story reminded you of someone, share it with them. The world needs more stories about the quiet ones who win. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And please, in the comments below, tell us about a time someone underestimated you. Or better yet, tell us about the person who saw you clearly when no one else did. Because sometimes, one person is enough, just like the dirt.